Welcome to the Biltmore Church podcast. Our church exists to glorify God by making disciples of Jesus who reach up, reach in, and reach out. And this podcast is a resource that's hopefully going to help you do just that. We're in week 4 of our Ask Me Anything teaching series, where we've been jumping into some of the biggest questions about our faith, maybe questions that you've been asking, maybe family members ask you, maybe the culture has been asking us to examine, and we're diving right into them, seeing what God's Word has to say. Together as a church, we've hit some of the big ones the last several weeks. And then here on the podcast, we're hitting even more of your questions that you've submitted, trying to get to as many of them as we possibly can, especially some of the repeated ones that we got several times through. So today we're going to jump right back in to another big question. Pastor, on Sunday you covered politics, and this one's a little bit related to that. Before we get into that, I'll do introductions. My name is Christian Cooper. I'm here today with Pastor Bruce Frank, who's our lead pastor. Also with Tyler Flores, who is our production director. Excited to jump on with you guys today. Here's the question on the table, and it is maybe a tough one, maybe not. How should Christians engage with social media?
I think a couple of thoughts, and then I know you guys have some thoughts and stuff on algorithms and all that, which will be very helpful. But I would say for the believer, anything that has to do, there's a ton of instruction in the Bible about your tongue. And your tongue is not your tongue as much as it is your words, your mouth.
Yeah.
Jesus says you're not going to be given account for every word that comes out of our mouth, which is scary. James spends almost half of chapter 3 on how both useful and how dangerous it can be. I mean, it can be something that can ruin somebody's life as well as it can be something that can bless somebody's life. So on the front end, social media can be a blessing or a curse. It can be a huge blessing. Use it properly. Educate yourself, get the gospel out, learn from other people, because you can, if you have it takes a little bit of discipline to actually look at some other viewpoints. So sometimes I'm like reading some other people, I'm like, I don't agree with that at all. But then I'm like, I'm going to read something else. And so like, at least I can learn a little bit. As you all will talk about though, that social media is not designed to do that. Social media is designed to get you stirred up typically, and get you stirred up typically with people who think very similarly to y'all. But I think in general, the way a Christian navigates himself is the way he navigates his words, but the words they stay there forever, and they tend to have a bigger audience. So if Tyler and I are talking, or the three of us, there's 3 of us here. But if you're on most any social media for any length of time, you have a lot larger audience than that, and all of a sudden you say something and it goes out. Now, whether people read it or take it seriously, years ago, it used to be you'd have to have something actually legitimate to say, and you'd publish a book or a journal or something like that. Now, all you've got to do is just set up your Facebook account, Instagram account, Twitter account, whatever. And then there's different strengths and weaknesses on the different platforms as well.
Right.
But when it comes to, how do we do it? I think any of the principles about, whether it be self-control, gentle answer, understanding the influence they can have, all that stuff is good for the Christian to keep in mind when it comes to social media, particularly when they post something.
I heard I think we were talking about this yesterday, and you used the analogy of a megaphone, right? Social media is a megaphone. It might help clarify some of that a little bit with what he was just mentioning.
Well, I mean, the reality is, like, as a species, we have had our families and our villages, like our communities.
Yeah.
And our voices only carried as far as our families or our communities. But with the advent of social media in the last 20, and this is not new, we all know this, but we stand on a block, and someone on the other side of the world can and maybe will hear what I'm saying. And I think we gain, and in that way, it amplifies my thoughts, whether or not I'm an expert, whether or not I have anything of value to say. It's just there. And I think when we have that megaphone in our hand, I don't know, when I was a kid, I used to love my dad was a youth pastor, so youth pastors in the 90s always had like a stash of megaphones. Like there were many, because they were, so I would grab that thing and I would just walk around, just, I have something to say. I have something to say. And I had nothing to say.
Right.
But I think we get the same thing happens in our heads and in our hearts, where we're like, look, I got 5 likes on my random comment about something that I probably shouldn't have said. That must be true. And we get these reinforcing things. And I mean, chemically speaking, like the endorphin hit says, you did that right, do it some more. When it's like, maybe I should learn to abide by Scripture and slow my tongue down just a little bit, because this megaphone in my hand, it's not actually as powerful as I think it is, but also it's way more powerful than I think it is. It's both.
Sure. And I would say we got to think, because we're thinking posting, but I think people read maybe 100 times more than they post.
Right. That's
true. So I think the intake versus even more so than the outtake. Outtake is important, and you got to be careful and disciplined and self-control. But the intake, what do you allow into your mind? You know, that we were talking earlier about the number one way that in your sanctification journey is the renewal of your mind. Yeah. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. And so everything you intake, you've got to look at. It's like if I'm intaking, I've missed some of the stats, but I think the average, at least Gen Z, are 5.5 hours on social media, primarily TikTok. And I think you just have to ask the question, what is that doing to my, what's that doing to my thought life? It can be very helpful. I mean, there's so much available. That's the deal. I mean, you can listen to like awesome podcasts like this, or you can listen to great preaching, all this kind of stuff. You can look at music. There's so much stuff, but it does take a little bit of caution, I would say, on just asking, what am I allowing? What am I thinking on?
Pastor, on our Tuesday episode, when we talked about politics, you mentioned the word echo chamber, and that word gets tossed around a lot when it comes to social media specifically, that we get ourselves into echo chambers. Can you talk to us a little bit about what is the danger of being? It's like I'm surrounded by people who agree with me. Like, what's the problem? What's the danger? The long-term dangers of essentially finding yourself in an echo chamber on social media?
I would say there's several. I think the biggest thing is you rarely grow by everybody just agreeing with what you say. And so it's designed to, like I just brought up, this is like trending, but if I put in like it's for you. Well, what is that? That's going to tell me based on my algorithm. All right, this is stuff you've looked at, and that's why I was scared. You like if you talk about dog food, and all of a sudden an advertisement for dog, they're listening.
It's real.
They're listening.
So real.
It's so real.
Oh my
I don't know how
gosh.
they're doing it, but somehow it's real. But even the same way as self-imposed, sometimes it's like this is these are the things you look at, and the danger with an echo chamber is again you rarely learn anything because people are just saying echo. It's what it is. Echo. Like if I say something. I'm just hearing the same thing. And again, there's nothing wrong with it's like reading authors that you agree with. That's really good. It reinforces your convictions, maybe explains why you think that. But at the same time, if you only read people agree with you, you're probably not getting you're not learning as much as you could. Now, when it comes to social media, I think the danger too is echo chambers it almost is like it's like going down a toilet, because if you're saying the same thing, you have to come up with a new gig for people to click and to look at it. So you tend to just raise your voice, or you make more outrageous statements, and then you get further and further, a lot of times, away from the actual facts. And so pretty soon you're like reading stuff that's like, okay, that is factually not the case. But it takes a while, because if people say it loud and say it often, the louder you say it, the longer you say it, pretty soon it's like, well, that's my, that's when people say, well, that's my truth. Well, no, there's truth, and there's stuff that's not true. Sometimes you have to dig a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's important for people to know the reality of the social media space, not to be alarmist or to just, incite fear. But these platforms, whether you take whatever, we can name all the social media platforms, they're designed to keep you on them. And how do they do that? They incite. They give you things, whether it's your deepest fears and insecurities and anxieties, they play on those, kind of like we talked about with the news cycle, or they're playing on whatever your strongest desire is, and they're going to continue to feed that. And I think we can make the mistake of saying like, oh, well, I don't like anything or comment on anything. Like, no, you don't understand. These companies they're reading how long you watch a thing.
For sure.
How long it happens before you start scrolling again. And they're using that and then feeding you stuff back, not because they want you to be in an echo chamber for that sake, but because they want you to stay on the platform. That's how they make their money.
Right.
And so I think it's helpful to know that going in and then make an informed decision based on that. I saw the average person touches their phone 2,617 times a day. Yeah, it makes you want to push it away, right? Yep. But there's reality in that. Paul, Romans 14, he's not talking about social media, he's talking about eating meat. But it's like, hey, you got stronger believers and weaker believers, and if you're a weaker believer in this area, you need to abstain. If you're stronger, maybe not. And so I wonder if that same principle could apply to social. Some people, you need to stay off.
Yeah, I think your point, it's always been there. like 20 years ago, the way politicians would do it is something would happen from their adversary or their opponent. They would make something that got in the news, and then what do? They write a fundraising letter to their constituents citing what their enemy did so they could then raise money based on the anger we have toward this person who is, I mean, how many times have you heard this next election is the most important election of your lifetime? I mean, you hear that if you've been around a little bit longer like I have, like you hear that every 2 to 4 years.
Yeah.
Every 2 to 4 years.
They've all been the most important.
They've all
ever.
been the most important thing. And sometimes, sometimes they are, and there's definitely a precipice and all that kind of stuff. But to your point, anger, keeping people stirred up with the same information, just louder. And that's when people start making stuff up, honestly. So that's why it's important, I think. And it's not just social media. You have now at your fingertips, you can actually get facts with just a little bit of work and make up your own mind. So for the Christian, I think it's just to be self-controlled, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and your mind. So think Christianly. And part of that is, trying to take and look at all this stuff going on, all this stuff, and say, what's the wise choice? Because it's usually not, this is definitively right, definitively wrong. Sometimes it is. What's the wise choice in navigating this? But for sure, what goes in your mind is going to make or break you.
On Sunday, I think in your message you mentioned that time, that season in your life where you caught yourself like, man, I get up, I get on my phone, and all of a sudden I spend an hour on that. And so maybe your people listening were here Sunday heard that, maybe some principles to try to combat that if they're like, oh, I'm in that same space, or man, I'm giving too much attention and time to that.
Sure.
Maybe what helps, what's the counter to that?
Well, I mean, again, I think sometimes we err so much on grace, which we should. We don't realize that God gave us some tools that take a little bit of initiative take some initiative on your part. One of them obviously is the Bible, and you got Bible, prayer, community, kind of those main ones. But to your point, if you weren't here Sunday, what I said was, since I came to Christ, I got discipled through Campus Crusade. Their whole thing was read the Bible, pray, scripture memory, share your faith. I mean, I got drilled, and that's a pretty good thing to be drilled on. So, and I'm a fairly disciplined person anyway. So for years and years and years and years and years, I'd get up early in the morning. I'm a morning person, read my Bible, drink a cup of coffee, pray. That's the way to start the day off. And I noticed for me, it was during COVID is when I would doom scroll. And
that's such a good phrase, right?
I mean, I would just get on there, and, I'd have my coffee, and I'm like, waiting for the coffee. Let me just jump on my phone. And then, all of a sudden, you're checking your fantasy football. And then all of a sudden, you're looking at the weather. But then you're looking at this, and it's always alarmist. And you click on that, and you're like, what? And then, and what I said is, next thing you know, an hour's gone by. And in my case, family was waking up at that point. And then I went on my day, and sometime those days turned into more days. And then after, it's not like if you miss a day in the Word, your day is going to implode. But you do that week after week after week, your soul begins to shrivel. For sure, your soul begins to shrivel, and at some point, it's gonna show up in some big things, attitudes, actions, whatever. So my point was, God gave us some what I would just call gospel-infused tools, and the main one is getting in the Bible. It's the main one. Obviously, we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks. How do you do that? I'm putting Bible and prayer. When you pray, God takes the Bible and makes it, puts it into your personal life. But my point would be the Bible. You got to get some intake. I think another thing would be, it's old fashioned, but or not old fashioned. The way I did it's old fashioned. I mean, you got a billion different memory deals, and I'm now older than some, so I would say. People, once they hit like 40 or 50, they're like, I can't memorize verses, and we got these kids. You need to have a verse that you are working on, whether that's an index card on your dash while you sit in traffic on Highway 40 or whatever, because, we looked at Psalm 1. I mean, that is the built-in blessing is on his day he'll meditate. And what does meditate? Just means reading it over and over and over again. So it might be that, blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, and you're just thinking that through. So my point is, you can't get out of culture, and you can't, it's hard to, social media is it's our culture.
Right.
So you've got to discipline yourself to some degree, and then pretty soon the discipline of getting in the Word becomes a delight, not automatically. Sometime it took me about, when I started going, what am I doing? I'm sitting there, and time I'm spending in the Word is almost exclusively for getting up sermons, and I was stressing out over COVID, and my joy was just sucked out because I was just so anxious, and there was a lot of stuff to be anxious about.
Yeah.
But then it was amazing just with a couple days jumping back into that quiet time. Your soul starts to be refreshed. Your joy comes back. It's not that you're like, give me my joy back. It's just your walk with the Lord.
Yeah.
and it's much more peaceful. Again, it doesn't mean the world's circumstance hasn't changed, but your heart is changing. So, and really your mind is changing. So the mind is fascinating, by the way. I mean, I think Tiflo's done more on that. The mind is fascinating when you look at the way God designed the highways and the good habits get you look at it and you're like, well, that's what Romans 12:2 says. And then now the scientists are like, well, there's neuron highways and they can be changed, blah, 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 blah. I was like, that's amazing.
Wait a minute.
I never heard this before.
I know, but it's like, but science, it's cool when the scientists kind of agree to, thousands of years later, hey, look at that.
Oh, yeah.
It does, what you think does turn into what you do.
So what I'm hearing you say really is we've just got to fight for balance. And the balance might look different for me and for you. I know that for me personally, I had to delete a couple apps from my phone. It was just, it was for me. But I'm not going to look at you and go, hey, I saw you got Facebook on your phone. You need to get that off of there. You know why? Let me tell you why. That's not what we do with this information. We say, God, help me find the balance between running after you daily and engaging with the world around me, because that's what it is. I don't know that the healthiest balance is to say, I'm just not going to be on any social media platform anywhere, because if all of the people who aren't running after Jesus, the people who are lost, if they're all standing in one room, physically speaking, they're all standing in one room. And I'm like, I'm not going to go in that room because it's full of lost people. And it's scary and dangerous in there, or they're gonna try to win me over. That might not be the healthiest approach. Like, no, I need to get into that room somehow, because that's where there are people.
You're a missionary.
Right, exactly. But fighting for balance, making that your priority. God, help me find balance today, because if I don't, then one of these things, I'm either going to isolate myself and I'm not going to have any impact on the world around me, which is the last thing Jesus said was, go make disciples, be where people are and draw them to me. That was what Jesus said. And if I run away from where the people are because I'm afraid that I might get hurt there, then that's not balance.
Right.
But of course, if I'm spending all my time there, if I'm letting it be the entire saturation of what's happening in my mind, then I promise you I'm not making disciples. Yeah. And so finding that balance point, I think, is going to be up to you, Mr. Listener.
Well, I think the wisdom question is just on a normal question is, if I spend 5 hours on TikTok and 5 minutes in the Word, which one is renewing my mind?
Yeah.
If you're not using the screen time on your phone, if you hopefully you know what I'm talking about, but if you're out there and you're like, what's screen time? Your phone, It'll tell you how many hours. It will literally say every day. It has a fun little bar graph that's really
embarrassing,
horrifying if you've never looked at it before. And there are even practical tools like setting limits right inside your phone. It doesn't mean you can't bypass them, but every now and then I've run up against them where it's like, hey, you spent an hour. You should stop. And again, I could say, no, I'm not going to. But most of the time I'm like, oh my gosh, has it been an hour?
And it's excellent. Another tool might be, if you have, anytime if you do something a few times in a wrong action, that starts to become a pattern. So if it becomes a pattern, you need some accountability. Or make some definitive choices, or you'll keep doing it. So to be blunt, I've almost, not totally, but I've probably limited my Twitter stuff now to very little. I mean, I'm like once every couple of weeks, maybe post something. Why? Because I like to be right. And I would see people, particularly in some of the endeavors I got to lead in, who I'm like, and I naturally like to stand up to the bully. And both those things going together sometimes don't go great on Twitter. And it's very easy to get down. Somebody talked about politics. It's like politics are like two pigs wrestling in the mud, and only, as it goes, like one enjoys it, one doesn't. All I found myself in, however that metaphor goes, desert, dessert, whatever. I don't even know what it is. I don't know. It's a mixed metaphor.
Yeah.
But the point is, I could tell, okay, I don't enjoy this, and I'm going down the rabbit hole. Where I'm not convincing them, they're not convincing me, and it's ticking me off. And it's like, in 5 minutes together, I guarantee you I could make you look stupid. But trying to do that on Twitter, and even the point of trying to do it on Twitter, it wasn't good for my soul. So I'm like backing off a little bit. Let some of you guys look at it, and you all kind of do too. Now, there's nothing wrong. To T's point, that doesn't mean it's wrong for him.
Right.
But it's kind of like knowing yourself. It's like, I
Self-awareness.
can't handle some of the stuff on there, so I'm just not going to engage in some of these guys.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Twitter's particularly dangerous because it's such limited content. I always think of TikTok's the wild, wild west. Instagram's kind of the happy fake place. I mean, it's kind of the happy fake place. Look at us on vacation. It's like it's Candyland. Facebook is like the barbershop or the beauty shop. It's the gossip corner. And
it's pretty good analogies.
I think Twitter's the land of Mordor. I think Twitter is the land of Mordor. I'm pretty sure.
You don't have to pass through there very often.
Candyland. Yeah, we'll just those are my analogies.
I'm hearing a lot of wisdom.
It is a barren wasteland, riddled with fire and ash
oh
and
my
dust.
goodness!
And now we open the can.
I'm sorry.
I started it.
A lot of people just judged me. I know you're out
You
there.
brought it on yourself, man.
I did.
But yes, wisdom, self-awareness, humility, some of those things. I think you've laid those out well. It's a helpful primer for people, hopefully, who are almost everyone's navigating that space.
Yeah,
so.
Those 3 or 4 characteristics are a good pursuit for all of us in all areas besides.
I'm incredibly
social
embarrassed
media.
right now.
Amen to that. Just sit the next few plays out, you know?
I need to. I'm going to be thinking about.
Wrap
It's when it's time to wrap it up.
Wrap it up.
All right, hey, thanks for watching today. Again, Sunday, we're jumping back into another big topic. We're not going to let the cat out of the bag, so to speak.
It is the elephant in the room.
But it's the elephant in the room. We want you to be there. You're going to be challenged and encouraged by it. So we'll see you this weekend. As always, you're loved and sent.